Welcome back to the Bitcoin Zodiac, where we explore Bitcoin through the lens of financial astrology and examine generational cycles over short-term noise. As we move into the final days of July and the beginning of August, the energy begins to shift. The emotional work of July slowly gives way to something more constructive. We have spent the past month strengthening foundations, questioning old assumptions, and adjusting to the North Node's move into Aquarius. Now the focus becomes implementation. Ideas begin looking more practical. Vision starts finding structure. Confidence becomes less about certainty and more about consistency. This period reminds us that lasting change rarely arrives through one dramatic event. More often, it emerges through a series of small decisions that gradually reshape the future. For Bitcoin, this chapter feels less like the beginning of a new story and more like the moment where the broader narrative starts becoming visible. The market continues navigating the long transition from speculation toward infrastructure, from curiosity toward adoption, and from price alone toward purpose. Let's begin with the full moon. On July 29th, we welcome a full moon at 6 degrees of Aquarius. Aquarius always invites us to zoom out. Full moons illuminate what has been quietly developing beneath the surface. Under Aquarius, that illumination often comes through perspective. You may suddenly recognize that you've outgrown a particular identity, community, or belief system. Sometimes growth isn't about becoming someone new. Sometimes it's recognizing you no longer need to carry an older version of yourself. Aquarius asks us to consider where we belong, not because we fit in, but because we can contribute authentically. This is an excellent full moon for reconnecting with communities that share your values while gently releasing environments built around obligation or expectation. Financially, Aquarius naturally directs attention toward networks, technology, innovation, collective participation. This full moon arrives only days after the North Node entered Aquarius, amplifying themes we've been discussing for months on this channel. The long transition toward decentralized systems continues. Bitcoin's significance has never rested solely on price. Its importance comes from offering an alternative model for trust. Rather than depending on institutions, Bitcoin depends upon mathematics, transparency, and distributed consensus. This full moon may bring increased visibility to adoption trends that have been quietly strengthening: institutional participation, infrastructure development, growing integration into traditional finance. For traders, Aquarius reminds us to widen the time horizon. Price may fluctuate. The direction of adoption often moves more steadily. Also on July 29th, Jupiter reaches Cazimi, becoming exactly aligned with the heart of the Sun. A Cazimi represents extraordinary clarity. The planet is symbolically purified by the Sun's light. For Jupiter, this creates a brief moment where wisdom, vision, optimism, and purpose become unusually focused. Personally, this transit invites us to reconnect with the beliefs that genuinely guide our lives, not inherited beliefs, not borrowed opinions, the principles that have been tested through experience. You may discover that your long-term direction suddenly feels simpler, not because every question has been answered, but because what truly matters becomes easier to recognize. Financially, Jupiter Cazimi often shines a light on the bigger picture. Markets can become consumed by daily volatility. Jupiter reminds us that meaningful wealth is built through decades rather than days. For Bitcoin investors, this transit encourages stepping back from short-term narratives. Ask yourself whether your investment decisions remain aligned with your deepest understanding of monetary change. The strongest conviction usually grows from clarity rather than excitement. On July 31st, Saturn forms a harmonious trine to Bitcoin's natal Jupiter. This is one of the most constructive long-term transits of this period. Jupiter represents expansion. Saturn provides structure. When these planets cooperate, sustainable growth becomes possible. Expansion supported by discipline tends to last longer than expansion driven purely by enthusiasm. For Bitcoin, this transit may coincide with continued institutional maturity. Regulatory frameworks may gradually improve. Infrastructure may strengthen. Large organizations often become more comfortable participating once uncertainty begins declining. This transit favors steady progress rather than spectacular headlines. For long-term investors, Saturn reminds us that conviction grows through patience. For traders, this aspect may encourage respecting higher time frame trends instead of reacting emotionally to every fluctuation.
I'm briefly interrupting this episode to speak to you about one of my best kept secrets, Shortlist. If you love luxury travel but hate the endless hours it takes to plan it, you need to know about Shortlist. Think of it as your premier membership for the uncompromising traveler. Shortlist gives you access to a beautifully curated world of exceptional hotels, villas, and experiences, with insider recommendations and reservations, and also exclusive member benefits designed to make every trip feel effortless. Less searching, better choices, extraordinary travel. If you're particular about where you stay and how you travel, Shortlist belongs on your radar. Click on the link in the description box to discover Shortlist. Okay, let's get back to the show.
Also on July 31st, the North Node forms a sextile to Bitcoin's natal Venus. Venus reflects value, attraction, financial relationships, and the way Bitcoin is perceived. The North Node points toward collective evolution. A sextile opens opportunities. This suggests Bitcoin's value proposition may become increasingly aligned with humanity's changing priorities. The world continues asking deeper questions about trust, ownership, transparency, monetary sovereignty. Bitcoin naturally participates in these conversations. This transit does not promise immediate price appreciation. Instead, it suggests that Bitcoin's philosophy continues moving closer to the direction collective consciousness is already traveling. The long-term adoption story may continue strengthening because cultural values themselves are changing. On August 6th, Mercury finally clears the territory where it previously retrograded. The review period concludes. Conversations that felt uncertain can begin moving forward. Plans become easier to execute. Information starts flowing with greater consistency. If the previous weeks encouraged reflection, this transit supports implementation. Financially, markets often appreciate greater clarity after Mercury fully exits its shadow. Research completed during the retrograde can now be applied with more confidence. This is an excellent time to revisit investment plans, portfolio allocations, or trading frameworks developed over the previous month. The learning phase begins becoming practical. Also on August 6th, Venus returns home by entering Libra. Harmony, balance, diplomacy, beauty. Relationships naturally receive greater attention. Personally, Venus in Libra encourages us to create more equilibrium between ambition and enjoyment, between giving and receiving, between independence and partnership. Financially, Libra often supports negotiation, agreements, partnerships, collaboration. For Bitcoin, this may coincide with increasing cooperation between traditional finance and digital assets. Rather than existing as opposing worlds, they may gradually discover areas where integration becomes mutually beneficial. Institutional adoption rarely happens through conflict alone. It often develops through relationship building. Later that same day, Jupiter forms a trine to Bitcoin's natal Mercury. Mercury governs communication, information, education, networks, and understanding. Jupiter expands everything Mercury represents. This is an encouraging transit for Bitcoin education, public awareness, institutional research, media coverage, academic interest. The quality of conversations surrounding Bitcoin may begin improving. Rather than focusing exclusively on price, broader discussions may emerge around monetary policy, self-custody, settlement networks, and long-term financial architecture. For investors, knowledge becomes one of the month's most valuable assets. For traders, clearer communication may reduce uncertainty around both geopolitical and market narratives. On August 7th, Saturn forms a quincunx to Bitcoin's natal Venus. Unlike the previous supportive aspects, this one asks for adjustment. Saturn introduces responsibility. Venus governs value. The quincunx often reveals subtle imbalances that require refinement rather than dramatic change. Markets may begin questioning valuation. Institutional participants could become more selective. Investors may demand stronger evidence before accepting optimistic narratives. This is not necessarily bearish. It often reflects maturation. Healthy markets periodically reassess value. Long-term investors can use this transit to review position sizing, risk management, and whether conviction still rests upon careful research. Traders may benefit from remaining patient if momentum temporarily slows. On August 12th, Jupiter forms a semisquare to Bitcoin's natal midheaven. The midheaven reflects public reputation, visibility, and long-term purpose. A semisquare creates mild friction. This transit may increase public attention while also revealing growing pains. Bitcoin's profile could continue expanding. With greater visibility often comes greater scrutiny, public debate, regulatory discussion, competing narratives. This aspect reminds us that becoming globally significant inevitably attracts greater examination. Growth often requires adaptation. The long-term trajectory remains more important than temporary headlines. The period concludes with a new moon and solar eclipse at 20 degrees of Leo. Solar eclipses begin chapters whose significance often unfolds gradually. Leo asks us to lead from the heart, to express ourselves honestly, to create with courage. Personally, this eclipse invites us to examine how we use our gifts. Are we creating from authenticity or seeking validation? Are we following purpose or simply following attention? Leo reminds us that genuine confidence grows through consistent self-expression. For Bitcoin, this eclipse may mark the beginning of a new chapter in public visibility. As the North Node now travels through Aquarius, the complementary Leo themes become increasingly important. Innovation still needs leadership. Technology still needs communication. Decentralized systems still require people willing to explain why they matter. This eclipse may encourage a new generation of educators, builders, entrepreneurs, and institutions to participate more visibly in Bitcoin's ongoing evolution. For traders, eclipses often coincide with periods where certainty becomes limited. Patience frequently becomes more valuable than prediction. Allow the story to develop before assuming you understand its final direction. As we move from July into August, one theme continues appearing across the astrology. Confidence is becoming more deliberate. The excitement surrounding innovation is gradually being supported by structure. Ideas are becoming systems. Vision is becoming implementation. For Bitcoin, this reflects the larger transition we've been following throughout this cycle. The conversation continues moving beyond speculation, toward infrastructure, toward adoption, toward a different understanding of money itself. The North Node's journey through Aquarius has only just begun. The broader themes we've explored together, the 18-year nodal reset, the changing world order, and the gradual redistribution of financial trust, will continue unfolding over the coming months and years. No single transit determines the future. Astrology offers timing. It helps us understand when collective psychology is becoming more receptive to certain ideas, technologies, and economic shifts. The choices people make within those periods remain their own. For investors, this period encourages patience, continued education, and disciplined conviction. For traders, remain attentive to changing sentiment while remembering that short-term volatility often exists within much larger structural trends. The future rarely announces itself in a single moment. It reveals itself gradually, one decision at a time. Thank you for joining me for this late July and early August forecast. If you've been following our conversation on the 18-year nodal reset and Bitcoin's role in the changing financial order, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new to the Bitcoin Zodiac, welcome. Consider subscribing if you'd like to continue exploring the intersection of astrology, macroeconomics, and Bitcoin through the lens of long-term cycles. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, peace, love, and Bitcoin.